Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and welcome to a little folklore storytime session where I read to you highly regional Northern German folklore, specifically from Dithmarschen, because that is where I live. This idea was highly suggested by my lovely patrons and YouTube members, so thank you very much for that. In case you also want a chance at influencing what kinds of videos I post on YouTube, then I recommend you check out my Patreon or my YouTube membership. You get the same kinds of stuff on both platforms. With this being a little storytime session, of course, this is more of a podcast format. Nothing fancy will be happening on screen, so feel free to use this more as a podcast. You could do something else while you're listening to this, do your chores, clean the kitchen, whatever you have to do, cuddle your cats for me, or get yourself a nice snack or a drink. I think this would be a good video for like a Sunday evening or a rainy Sunday afternoon. For this video, I dove headfirst into my collection of very regional folklore from specifically Dithmarschen, so in the northwest of Germany, at the North Sea. If you know anything about European countries and the borders, then you know this is very close to Denmark. And if you are kind of well versed in Scandinavian folklore, then you will very quickly realize that it is very similar to Scandinavian folklore. And also the border between Denmark and Germany hasn't been always where it is now. It has shifted north-south, north-south. There have been a lot of wars between Germany and Denmark concerning that border. So there has been a lot of exchange between Scandinavia, specifically Denmark, and Germany. So I would describe the folklore around here kind of like a 50-50 mixture of more Scandinavian folklore and more folklore that you would expect from maybe central Germany. I translated the folklore, so this is lore that I have in my books in German. I don't really know where you would find it in English, so I translated it for you in hopes that I can make it more accessible. I know that people at the moment are very interested in folklore, so here we go. I translated some lore, and if you like this, then I will continue doing it, and then this will maybe become a series. And once we're done with lore from Dithmarschen, then maybe we can go on to Nordfriesland, or maybe we can go on to more general German folklore, maybe go into more central German folklore, or whatever you want. But for now, Dithmarschen it is, because that is where I live, so. The first story that I have prepared for you is The Devil's Stick. On a farm in Süderdeich worked a farmhand who was in love with a maid from the neighboring village. Once upon a Sunday evening, when he had visited her, the weather had gotten so bad and the night so dark that he asked her for a stick he could lean on while going back home. The girl gave him an old stick she had recently found under a closet while sweeping. The farmhand took the stick and went home. But the weather got even worse and the night even darker, so the farmhand thought to himself, if only I already was at home. And before he knew it, he was. At first he didn't pay much attention to it, but slowly he got scared, because now whenever he was doing some work and he wished he was done, all of a sudden it became true. Then he remembered the stick the maid had given him and tried to get rid of it. He broke it and threw it into the water. But when he came back to his room, there again was the stick. And the same happened when he tried to burn it. Finally, the farmhand went to a priest and told him about everything. The priest didn't know what to do either and sent him home again without any help. But the farmhand was so scared, he went to the priest again and begged him for help. Because like this, right now, he didn't dare spend any time at home anymore. So the priest led him into church at midnight. What the farmhand heard and saw, he didn't want to tell to anyone afterwards. But a third person had been there as well. And when they were done with whatever they were doing, the priest told the farmhand to take the stick and return home. No matter how much vermin tries to block the way, the priest said, he should still keep on going and then look for a hole in the ground and thrust the stick into it. The boy should then go back twice and do the same thing again and again. And by the third time, he should say, "In God's name!" And from then on, the stick would stay away. This the farmhand did, and it became true. When the farmhand thrust the stick into the hole in the ground a third time, it stayed away. Apparently we have a very devilish walking stick there on our hands. There's so much folklore about things that are doing magical things, and they're always, of course, related to the devil, because we know everything that's kind of magical, everything that's doing weird stuff is devil's work. But now something else that is not devilish, but very much magical indeed, is the sponsor of today's video, which is Aura. So let's quickly get it over to sponsor Bente, and then afterwards we will continue with the other stories. Aura is a mindfulness and sleep app that has won the Best of Apple Award and is currently used by over 7 million people. It's a great all-in-one app for your sleep and well-being, with thousands of meditations, sleep stories and so much more, like cognitive behavioral therapy, life coaching and even breathwork. Aura's content is created by hundreds of expert coaches around the world. Its content is highly customizable, notifying you about content that has been picked specifically for you every single day. You can also create playlists of your favorite content and work on mood trackers and gratitude journals, which is a great way to track your results. At the moment, what I love most about Aura is the programs and challenges, because they help me stay on track with my daily meditations while also getting better at meditating every single day. Aura is basically like a Spotify for your mind and soul. Unlike on traditional apps that only give you a few coaches in a one-size-fits-all package, on Aura it is very easy to find a guide that resonates with you. So if you struggle with meditating daily, or if you want to enhance your meditation practice, then I challenge you to try it for 30 days. You can get started using Aura now completely for free on Aura's website by using my special link in the video description. The first 500 people using my link get a free 7-day trial and also exclusive 25% off. Next up, we're going from the devil to witches, which of course is also a big thing in folklore. And this time the witches are stealing butter. If on May Day morning there is dew, it will be a good year for butter. On one morning like this, a witch went onto the neighbor's fields by sunrise and picked up the dew with a big linen sheet, and thus collected it in a bucket. From this bucket she always took a spoonful of dew whenever she wanted to make butter. She poured the dew into the butter churn and said, "Udekut in lebel full," which is Low German and means "from each pot a spoonful." By doing that, she took 1 spoonful of butter from every neighbor she took dew from. One time her farmhand had to make butter and wanted to do the same thing. But when he poured the spoonful of dew into the butter churn, because he had heard wrong previously, instead of saying "Udekut in lebel full," he said "Udekus ein Schäppel full," from each pot a bushel full instead of a spoonful. Then he started churning, but there came so much butter that it poured through the entire house and the people didn't know what to do with it. So apparently the farmhand had misheard the witch and used the wrong incantation, the wrong charm to make butter, and then accidentally made way too much butter. That must have been a very slippery situation with the house full of butter, and probably the neighbors were also not very happy about having been stolen a bushel full of butter. And this is kind of a common theme. We see witches stealing something or being malicious, you know, that is the folkloric image of what a witch is or what a witch does. It's always stealing something by witchcraft or putting hexes and curses on other people by witchcraft. That is usually what we see. But what I find interesting is this little tidbit of information in the beginning. This, if a May Day morning there is dew, like on the grasses, on the meadows, it will be a good year for butter. That is very interesting. And also that the witch goes onto the neighbor's fields by sunrise and picks up the dew with a linen sheet, because that's also something that I know from trolldom, specifically not on May Day, but on Midsummer's Day, going out and collecting the dew with a sheet and then using that dew for magic. So it seems like using dew from magic is something that you can do, not only in Scandinavia, but also in northern Germany. And I think it's interesting because it's kind of like using dirt. You know, the person is using the dew from the neighbors' fields to kind of affect them. So it seems like the dew kind of works as a tag lock. And I think that's interesting. Next up, we have something else about witches, but this time they are stuffing Strife into bedding. Always be careful when someone stuffs the bridal bed, because witches stuff the bedding with peace or strife, depending on whether they like or dislike the bridal pair. They once stuffed Strife into the bridal bed of a young couple that really loved each other, but that the old hags for some reason disliked. Bride and groom had had a beautiful wedding day, but once they got into bed they started to fight, and soon the verbal fighting turned into a physical fight. The groom's parents, who stayed in the room next door, heard the fighting but couldn't get them to calm down. They finally told the couple to go to bed, and once they did, they got along rather well for the rest of the night. But once the groom's parents went back to bed, a fight broke out between them, even though they hadn't fought their entire life. The fighting went on until the next morning. Then the bed was examined and the bedding cut open. When the down was removed from the bedding, the feathers were all braided into rings with silken threads of different colors. Now everyone knew that the old hags who had stuffed the bedding were witches and had stuffed Strife into it. So this is also very interesting. First of all, who still stuffs their bed? It seems like they were making the bedding by stuffing down into it, but they manipulated the bedding by braiding the feathers into little rings with little differently colored threads. So interesting is they were working with color, they were working with thread, and by doing that they kind of hexed the bridal pair. That's nasty, but it's also kind of funny. Also interesting to see there is a hex in the bed. That's also kind of common to have a hex either in the bed or underneath the bed. Next up, we have something that will sound familiar to you, because this story is about the nightmare. Whenever 7 boys or 7 girls are born, one after another, one of them becomes a nightmare who sits on sleeping people's chests, frightening and tormenting them. A man once had unknowingly taken one of them as his wife. But soon he noticed that a lot of nights his wife went missing from their bed. So one night he stayed awake to watch what his wife was doing at night. He saw her get out of bed, and because the door was locked, she left through the keyhole. After some time, she came back the same way. From then on, every night the man closed off the keyhole and his wife never went wandering again. But one day, the man thought his wife must have surely given up her bad habit, so he opened the keyhole again. The following night, his wife left again, and from then on, she never came back. The only sign of her was the fresh clothes he found laid out by her every Sunday morning. If you are kind of aware about folklore, you know that the mare is something that was already known in pre-Christian Scandinavia, so it is a very, very, very old tale. And you see, we also have this in northern Germany, and it's the same thing. It's a kind of spirit, which is interesting because here it is some kind of spirit-ish thing, because it's definitely not a normal human, which normal human can go through keyholes, but it's also not a full-on spirit. It has a body because a dude thought it was a normal woman. It is some kind of spirit, maybe even like a shapeshifter, could also be that it has something to do with shapeshifting, but here it is kind of a hybrid situation of some kind of spirit and a human who sits on other people's chests at night and torments them. Okay, now we have something that is related to old Stone Age graves, like those huge grave situations made from huge boulders. We have a lot of them up here, so there is of course a lot of lore around them, because people back in the early times didn't know what that was. So there is a lot of lore about it, and a lot of it has to do with giants and stuff, which I love. Boulders, big boulders, and giants, those are always connected. Either the giants are living in the boulders, or they're throwing the boulders at churches and things like that. I love it. So this one is about the Steenaben Guy. So you will see a lot of this is Low German, Plattdeutsch, because that's the language that was spoken back then by the normal country folk who were spreading this folklore. So inside the Steenaben, this translates to stone oven, and it's a megalithic stone monument or grave. Inside the Steenaben, on the road from Weddingstedt to Ostrohe, which is actually like 10 minutes from here, max, lives the Steenaben Guy or dude. He lures people into the White Moor so they lose their way. That is actually a moor that is still called the White Moor, and it's like 10 minutes from here. One evening, two men were walking from the meadow bridge to Weddingstedt. It was dark and the pathway was barely visible. All of a sudden they see a man in front of them who seems to be going the same way as them. So they follow him. But all of a sudden the apparition vanishes and the men realize that they have lost their way and are now in between the peat ditches. They end up wandering around all night and only find their way back the following morning. This is also kind of a mixture of different lores, so a mixture of the lore about these megalithic stone monuments and graves, and lore about moors and peats, and also about things wandering in the fog, because it's usually very foggy around here. But moors have a lot of lore about them around here, which also makes sense because in Bronze Age times there was a lot of ritual stuff going on in moors, and a lot of offerings and sacrifices were done here. People were, like actual humans were sacrificed, animals were sacrificed. And I think this is still represented a lot in local folklore. So here we have some kind of spirit that is living in one of these megalithic monuments and luring people into the moor. Now we have the stolen cup, and this one includes the underground folk, just like there is all throughout Scandinavia. Here we also have a lot of lore about spirits, some kind of creatures living underground. So a lot of the times they're interpreted as maybe dwarves or like the hidden folk. There's a lot of lore about them, and they usually have something to do with like riches and wealth and things like that. So that kind of makes sense with the dwarves, doesn't it? The stolen cup. A man from Tensbüttel called Klaus Fink once rode with his horse into one of the mountains between Tensbüttel and Albersdorf called the Mannigfalligen. There the underground folk were having a feast and they let the man participate. But the man stole a silver cup and rode away. At New Year's Eve his family wanted to drink from the silver cup, but suddenly all of the cattle started screaming wildly. So everyone went outside to look after them, because they wanted to know what was going on. When they went back, because they couldn't find anything, the underground folk had taken back their cup. So this is a short little one. Interesting here is we see them riding into a mountain. I don't know which mountain they're talking about because we don't really have mountains around here. Fun fact, some places around here are below sea level, so it's very flat here. We don't really have proper mountains, so you don't have to think of the Alps or something like that, but it's just a little hill. A lot of times what they meant were graves, Bronze Age graves, sometimes even Stone Age graves, sometimes Viking Age graves, so grave hills were a lot of the times what was meant, and that also makes sense when they talk about the hill opening up or the mountain opening up and someone riding into it and people being in there. Because there is actually, like if you read the sagas, like the Icelandic sagas for example, you see a lot of talk about people dying into a hill or into a mountain. So there was this thought of people not just dying and moving on to wherever, Valhalla, hell, wherever, but there was this perpetual thought of people living on in either a sacred mountain that was usually tied to a family, or them continuing to live on in the hill that they are buried in. So in their burial mound they would live on, and there's also stories about those mounds opening up and them having a feast there or a party there. So this is definitely a continuation of that, but now they are called the underground folk. So it's not like a dead person, but just some kind of creature living there, but they're friendly to the humans. But the humans just steal their stuff. But it's usually something like, oh, they're invited there and then they drink with them or they feast with them, or they find a pot of gold there or like some kind of treasure and then they steal something and then something happens. The next one will probably sound familiar to you because a lot of people know about the Nisse or the Tomte from Denmark, Norway, Sweden here. I already made a video on those household spirits. Here they are called Nispuk, and this one is about the Nispuk. It is called Nispuk in the box. A farmer from Oosterborstel near Albersdorf got very rich very fast. And everything he did, he succeeded in. The people in the village had seen a dragon bring him money from time to time, but they didn't think all of his luck had come just from that. Instead, they thought he had a Nispuk. One time the farmer had gone out with his wife when a maid who had always been curious found that the key of an old closet she had seen the farmer secretly rummage in was still stuck in the lock. So she opened the closet, but she found nothing inside but a small box. When she opened the box, a small guy wearing a pointy red hat jumped out of the box and escaped. As much as she tried to catch him, she couldn't. Every time she thought she had cornered him, he escaped into a different corner. After some time, it was getting late, and the maid knew that the farmer and his wife would be coming back home soon. So she started to panic, and she took the fire tongs, made them red hot, and went after the little guy yet again. Now he realized it was getting serious, and he started screaming and running back and forth, and lastly back into the closet and into his box. Afterwards, the maid pretended like nothing had happened, but from now on, everybody knew where the wealth and the luck had come from. So this is kind of a usual tale, where one farmer, for some reason, is very wealthy, is very lucky, he just has everything, and everybody wonders, why is that? What I find interesting here is that this also mentions dragons, and we're not talking about huge dragons like Fafnir or something like that here. We're not talking about a huge dragon sitting on his hoard. The folkloric dragon in Germany is usually like a little spirit that kind of steals things for you or brings you wealth. So I think it's interesting that it's mentioned here, because I see this usually more in central Germany and not up here in the north. So we have two spirits that are very connected with wealth and luck. But in this case, the farmer is wealthy and lucky because of the Nispuk, which, if you've seen my video, I will link it up here, is a spirit who helps out on the farm if you give them regular offerings. It's like the typical household spirit that you see in Northern German folklore. And yeah, they help around the house, and if you keep them happy, you give them the offerings, you don't try to constantly annoy them, and if you of course don't anger them, don't annoy them, then you will get very wealthy and very lucky. And in this case, for some reason, they're keeping that poor Nispuk in a box. Usually when they're mistreated, something bad happens, but apparently in this case, that Nispuk is living in the box and apparently nothing bad happens. Now lastly, we have something that I promised I would tell you more about, and that is the lore about the Fünf-Finger-Linde, or the five-finger linden tree, which I also just recently went to and visited. This is quite old lore about a tree that is still standing, and it's beautiful. It's an amazing spirit. I really want to go back, because this is a very grandmotherly, very, very warm, very wise spirit, but also kind of strict. So I really like that spirit. In the village Odderade, there grew up a girl who was extraordinarily beautiful, but people also said that she was very stuck up. None of the boys seemed to be good enough for her. She seemed to like when someone flirted with her, but unlike the other girls, she didn't flirt back. She went out with one boy, then with another, but nothing serious came out of it. She also got spoiled by her father, who had lost his wife early on and who belonged to the more esteemed people in the village. When she was just over 18, she started staying away at parties long into the night, but she always came back before midnight. Then she always knocked at the door to her father's room to tell him that she was back home before she went to bed. One day though, her father got very worried, because she hadn't come back home. He hadn't heard her knock on his door, and her room was empty as well, the bed unused. The men sent for his brothers, who brought along their sons and farmhands to help look for the girl. In the tavern she had been seen dancing with multiple boys, but nobody remembered with whom and when exactly. Because they couldn't get any more information in the village, they continued their search in the forest. There, they found the girl lying in the moss. Her eyes widened in shock, strangulation marks on her neck. Strangely, somebody had folded her hands and laid wildflowers into them. Her father was distraught and started crying, and the other men didn't know what to do. While they were still standing there in shock, a man came wandering along the forest track. When that man saw all of the other men standing there in the deep dark forest, he thought them to be bandits. So he got scared and ran away, naturally. The girl's family ran after him, and soon they caught him. Because he had tried to run, everybody thought he was the girl's murderer. They brought the man back to the girl's father, who was still kneeling next to her crying, and told him they had caught her murderer. Because they had beat him up, the supposed murderer had blood running down his face, and his hands were dirty and his hair all tangled. They pushed him towards the girl's corpse and accused him of her murder. He tried to protest his innocence, but they didn't want to hear any of it. One of the girl's uncles told him if he really wasn't the murderer, he should swear to God and all of the saints that he neither was the murderer himself nor knew who he was. But the man was so scared that he accidentally lifted his left hand instead of the right one. "A judgment of God," the men yelled. "He has revealed himself to be the murderer." So they started hanging him on a linden tree. While they were binding the knot around his neck, the men said, "This hand has sworn the truth before God, and neither you nor your descendants shall forget about it." Nobody listened to him. They hanged him and buried him in the forest before they returned to the village to take care of the girl's burial. Nearly 50 years later, one of the girl's neighbors felt that death was near. So he sent for the priest because he wanted to confess before dying. But the priest couldn't come on time, so on his deathbed, the man confessed to his daughter-in-law. A girl had once, when he was still young, lured him from a dance in the tavern into the forest. She had made him wild with love and lust, but then she had rejected him and even made fun of him. Without knowing what he did, he had then strangled her to death. He felt so bad that he laid flowers in her hands. Then he returned to the tavern. But in the exact place where the man lay buried, who had wrongly been accused of murder, a 5-finger linden tree started to grow. Still today, it is standing there, like a left hand held up for an oath. And yes, it is still standing there in the forest near Heide, and it's still standing there with its 5 fingers raised for an oath. It actually does look like a hand. It's actually a very old winter linden tree. I hope this is what it's also called in English. And that is a very, very old kind of linden tree, which does not grow a lot anymore, so they are very rare. And this one is a very, very old tree, very, very thick, and just an amazing plant spirit. So those were all of the stories that I wanted to tell you. I think they're all very interesting, and I think from each single one we can learn something for our practice. If you want this to become a series, I am very welcome to translate more folklore for you. This was actually very, very fun. I really enjoyed doing this. Tell me in the comments. I will listen. And yeah, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so that you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Of course, check out my Instagram if you want to keep more up to date with my personal life and what I'm up to on the daily. And with that being said, I will see you in another video. Bye!